Okay, so B'siyata D'Shmaya, we're going to begin. Thank you, everybody, for joining me and us, all of us, who are going to attempt to dive into a teaching from the Holy Bas Ayin, Rav Avram Dov, there of Average, a Talmud of the Raditcher, a Talmud of the Noam of the Melech, many of the Tzaddikim, Talmidei HaMagid, who lived in Svat for the latter part of his life. And this piece from the Bas Ayin not only talks about Parshas Bamidbar, and it's based on Psukim in Parshas Bamidbar, but it's really a good hachana for Kabbalas HaTorah as well, which is why I chose this piece, not only because of Bamidbar, but here we are getting ready for Shavuos, amidst one of the most challenging periods of time that I can remember for a long time. And we've lived through quite the challenging period of time over the past year. But the past couple of weeks with Rahman al-Islam, the tragedy in Meron, and what's going on here in Yerushalayim and in Eretz Yisrael is really not simple at all. And so it's sort of a struggle to remember that the world is falling apart around us, but inside, nothing stops. In terms of our own avoda, in terms of Shavuos is coming, and we have to do our achanas. And it's very difficult sometimes because we get distracted, we get lost among the experience of everything that's happening around us. But it's very, very important at the same time to at least for a couple of minutes, a day, preferably more than that, to shut off, everything that's going on around, and to try still to focus on our avoda, be it davening, be it learning, and to continue to work on ourselves, because that's the tachlis hachayim. We get so busy, worried about life, that we forget, well, what are we worried about? For what? What is the life that I'm worried about, right? Why am I here in the first place? And so I would think that it's very foolish for a person to get so caught up, worried about the circumstances of life, to the point that it obscures our involvement and engagement with the very essence of what life is all about in the first place. So that's just a little bit of chizuk, to keep us strong in the hachana. And that's what tonight's shiur is also going to be a chelik of, to help us prepare for the Chag by learning about these ideas. Another feature of the Torah that we're going to learn tonight is the concept of Bitachon, the concept of trusting in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Emunah, Bitachon, what place that has, at what stage that is. And B'siyata D'Shmaya, we're going to be able to delve very deeply into the Tzaddik's teaching. So I'm going to share my screen in a minute, and we're going to jump in. Okay, so here we see the Holy Bas Ayin. It's the first piece in Parshas Bamidbar. And the Tzaddik begins with the very first pasuk in Parshas Bamidbar, in Sefer Bamidbar, by Yedaber Hashem al Moshe, HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu Bamidbar Sinai, in the Sinai desert, Ba'oil Moed, in the Oil Moed, in the tent of meeting, Be'echad HaChodesh Hasheni, on the first of the second month, and the pasuk continues, on the second year from their having left Mitzrayim. That's the first part of. That's the very first pasuk of Sefer Bamidbar that goes on to describe how HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands Moshe to take a census of all of Am Yisrael, and the larger part of Sefer Bamidbar is going through that census, right? All the different mishpachas, all the different positioning of the different parts of Am Yisrael in the Midbar, the different degalim, and then at the very end it speaks also about some of the avodas of the Kohanim and what they had to do, both when the Mishkan was functioning, when it was up, and more so when they had to take down the Mishkan and travel with it, to travel on the Membeis Masayos to set it up in a different place. And so that's basically Parshas Bamidbar, but the pasuk begins with this. The parsha begins with this pasuk. So he brings V'hikshe v'sefer Ar Chaim v'seder pasuk. He says that the Ar Chaim already asked about the seder of the pasuk, why it's set up in the way that it is. Shaboidas hamakim kasav klal tchila, ve'achar kach haprat, uvoidas hazman kasav haprat tchila ve'achar kach haklal. Right? When you find over here the reference to the place, you would assume that we would speak about ba'oil ma'id, and then b'midbar Sinai. You would speak first about the particular place in which this commandment or in which this conversation was being had between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Moshe, and then you speak about the larger context. Why over here do we find that it's switched? And by the time you find also that it's the opposite. Also, by the time you find that first we begin with the day and then the larger context of B'shana Hashenis, right? In the second year that they left Mitzrayim, why does it go from Klal to Prat? And then in the time it's from Prat to Klal. V'teret Sham, and the Ar Chaim gives his answer, but says the Bas Ayin so beautifully, V'gam ani nechalki. But he says, in Chanami, the R Chaim gave an answer, and I'm sure many of the Mefarshim deal with this, but I also want to give my chelik, and that's the beauty of Torah, and I bless us all, that we should be able to find the courage to say, V'gam ani en chelki. You know, we spoke so often in the past about the inyan of, if you know Aleph, teach Aleph, you know, that this illusion that I'm going to be able to teach Torah, when I become a master of this and a master of that you're never going to master everything. The Torah is Rechavim min hayam, l'chol tichla re'isi kate, Shlomo Melech says, I saw an end to everything, but Rechavim mitzvahsecha ma'od, but your mitzvahs are endless, right? And so take whatever we know and to be able to share that to somebody else with confidence, to have clarity in what our chelik is, especially in this generation, is a very big thing. So I bless us that we should be able to also say that, right? That each and every one of us should also be zocha to give our portion to contribute what we came to the world to contribute in Torah scholarship. What it appears to me, the Seder HaPasuk, to understand the Seder of the Pasuk, what's the remez, what's the relevance to us in this Pasuk that describes HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking to Moshe in Midbar Sinai, Ba'oil Ma'ir, Be'echad HaChodesh, Hasheni, on the first of the second month to the second year of Am Yisrael having left Mitzrayim. So the tzaddik says like this, he says it's known, that the very essence of our faith is the inyan of Emunah. Emunah is associated with Malchus. We're in the week of Malchus now. Malchus, of course, is the princess, the Bas Melech, the Bas Malka, Shabbos Malkusa, the name of our newsletter, B'chazei Hashem. Actually, tomorrow marks the first anniversary of LPI, believe it or not. 1 year ago, exactly 1 year ago is when we started and we sent out the very first message. What a year it's been. Ezer Hashem, I'm going to send something out about that tomorrow. But Baruch Hashem, that's our newsletter, Shabbos Malchus. So Shabbos is Malchus, Shabbos is the Bas Melech, Shabbos is the inyan of Emunah. That the rest of the week, we could fall under the illusion of us having contributed to the process in the sense of us doing hishtadlus. But on Shabbos, everything stops. And we realize that ultimately, essentially, we're always just resting all the time because things are happening on their own. Sheishis yamim te'asem malacha, like the Lubavitch Rebbe says, the malacha is happening on its own in as much as we realize the message of Shabbos, that everything's Hashem, as we're going to learn. But the Nakuda here is that the essence of Yiddishkeit is Malchus, is Emunah, the Lesla Megarmi Klum, the inyan of Tefillah, the inyan of David HaMelech, who constantly says about himself, Va'ani Tefillah. David's whole essence, like we've spoken also in the past, is the bechina of Tefillah. What's Tefillah all about? Tefillah la'ani kiyato, to feel like a pauper, to feel like I don't have, to feel like I need to rely on Hashem for everything, which of course we do. That's the essence of Yiddishkeit. That's the emunah that often gets lost. And the whole secret of what we're trying to accomplish here, our chevra, is to try to reclaim that, right? And to try to make that, again, on the platform where it belongs, on the pedestal, the center of our faith, of our Yiddishkeit. So he says the essence, v'sharish, right? Right? We're all familiar with the pasuk that says v'tzadik be'emunasoi yichya. That the tzaddik lives, thrives. His whole energy, his whole vitality, his whole chiyus comes from what? From his emunah. V'gam bitachon, and it's not just emunah, which is more of an aspect of believing theologically, theoretically, to understand that there's a Hashem, but bitachon is emunah actualized. Bitachon means that so much I'm plugged into faith that I can actually act on that I can rely on that, right? To rely, v'isham al meshantei, to lean on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak. That's the bechina bitachon. It's emunah put into action. Talk is cheap, right? But to really rely on Hashem, that's the nekuda bitachon. Like the pasuk says, "Betach b'Hashem," trust in Hashem, v'aseh tov, and perform goodly actions. Shchan Eretz, live in the land, ure'ei emunah, and foster faith. That's a reference Rabbi Nachman says to Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is the land of faith. Kol hadar ba'aretz dayim k'mishi yesh la'elokav. Here we see miracles, mamish, daily, right? The whole air is filled with faith, even those that are the biggest heretics, quote unquote, but their hearts are filled with faith. A simple taxi driver, everybody knows, right? The whole land is saturated with emunah. Shchan Eretz ure'ei emunah. But we see that the pasuk that makes reference to bitachon is connected to emunah. These two are the foundational elements of avodas Hashem. There's also a pasuk in Tehillim, which the tzaddik doesn't bring, but it's very, very open, where David HaMelech literally says, "V'chol mitzvaysecha emunah." Ribbana Shalom, all of your mitzvahs, the sum total of 613 mitzvahs, with millions upon millions of chilukei dinim and cases and circumstances and halachas, all of it, v'chol mitzvaysecha emunah. That's the essence of it. What does bitachon and emunah lead to? Of course, emunah and bitachon leads to simcha. The more a person, or let's put it this way, in direct proportion to the amount that we're able to give it up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like they say, let go, let go and let God, right? To let go and really put it on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, hashlich al Hashem yahavcha, to cast our burden onto Hashem. That's exactly the proportion. That's exactly commensurately is how much we're going to have shalva, how much we're going to have peace when we don't feel as if the whole world's on our shoulders. And we're able to realize that not only is Hashem carrying the world, he's carrying us in the world. We're also, not just that we can leave everything to him, but still manage our own lives. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is carrying us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is holding us. And in direct proportion to the amount that we're able to realize that and actually act based on that, and that's the difficult part, so that's going to bring us to Emunah. These three things, Simcha, Bitachon, and Emunah. The pasuk says, "Po eshev ki ibisia." The Shechina says, "Po eshev." This is where I dwell. This is where I'll sit. Ki ibisia, because this is where I desired. This is where my desire is. Of course, it's talking about the Makom HaMikdash, which, after 2,000 years, is still the focal point of the entire world. What happens there sets off a chain of events that literally could bring the entire world into an upheaval. Everything is still, in 2021, in the postmodern era, is still focused on this old ancient mountain, this place called Har Bayis with the Eben Shasiya. You can't get away from it. The whole world is sviv this nikuda, this place. Po eshev, says the Shechina, this is where I want to be. Ki ivisiya. And the tzaddikim say that eshev is Rosh Tevis, Emunah, Simcha, Bitachon. Po eshev. Ki ivisiya. When a person is able to live a life of Emunah and Bitachon, Memela, it's going to bring about and foster a certain simcha sachayim, a certain sort of like a lightweight, what Rabbi Nachman calls erech hapayim, not so heavy, not anger, not charon af, anxiety, stress, and we're living through very, very stressful times. But the ability to give that up to Hashem and say, Rebbeinu Shalom, what's it going to help? Tachlis, what's it going to help? I'm anyway not in control. So what does it help that I'm going to make myself crazy over it? I give it to you. You're running the world. I'm doing everything that I can do as shtadlus, which we'll speak about. But after that, I'm giving it to you. That's going to create a chair, so to speak. That's going to create a merkava, a chariot for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to sit in our lives, because Hashem's sitting is wrapped up into the word eshev. And eshev, like we said, is Rosh Tevis, Emunah, Simcha, and Bitachon. Amnam, however, says the Bas Ayin, Mitsuda Prusal Kol Chai. There's nothing we can do, right? Some of the chaver are still in yeshiva or young and in the parents' house, but it's going to hit you at some point, and it's hitting all of us. Parnasa matters, right? And this is a tremendous mitzuda. It's like a trap. It's like a curse, right? Because ultimately this was the curse of Adam Rishon. It wasn't supposed to be that way. Before the Chet Adam Rishon, the Gemara describes there was bread growing on trees, and everything was mamish. All the malachim were preparing food for them. Wasn't supposed to be in such a way, but now this is, the majority of a person's life is spent in the office or some form of the office, right? Thinking about parnasa, which is a pella, because ultimately it's a very secondary thing to our actual living. A person doesn't want to be defined by what they do. A person wants to be defined by what they are, right? What they're all about. What you didn't come to the world so that you should live so you can go to work, and you go to work so you can make money, so you can buy food, so you can live, so you can go to work. It's an endless cycle. That's what this is all about. So it's a little bit of a tragic circumstance and reality that people are going to spend the majority of their lives trying to do something that's completely secondary, which is why so much we need to have in mind the princess all the time, so that even in our work, we can make that princess oriented. When that becomes a chair in and of itself, and that becomes a merkava for the real us, right? And who we really are and what we're really about. But that's a separate nekuda. But the Bas Ayin says here that it's a mitzuda, it's a trap that's spread over all living beings, that a person needs to put bread on the table. And this is a trap that a person is trapped in. And he says over here that ultimately it's very possible for a person who feels trapped and feels under the net of that obligation, which all of us do and all of us will. It's possible for a person to then enter a state of trying to go ahead and to make parnasa in a way of tachbulas v'armunias, in a way of all sorts of negative, not yashrus strategies and tricks and different twisted ways that ultimately, because he's desperate, what can he do? But ultimately, that's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. And ultimately, such a person is going to think, That what was it that enabled him to go ahead and make a paycheck at the end of the month or pay for his kids' tuition and so on and so forth, was this, that he took control of his own circumstances and he went and manipulated some system or lied to somebody or stepped on another guy. And if he hadn't done that, if he just, went along with the rest of the chevra, he believes that he would not be able to be in the financially secure situation that he's in. And so there's a certain feeling of koich ha'otzim yadi in the sense that it was what I did, not just the person goes to the office, I worked, I make a paycheck. It's more than that. Because over here you have a person that his whole parnasa is based on this whole twisted, very conniving strategy that's focused in his own plans, not necessarily just sort of going with the general flow of things. So it's very easy for a person to fall into such an aspect. And such a person is not in the nakuda of bitachon umamin ba'Hashem shebevada yasmin le parnasa v'chayin nafshay. You have to do ishtadlus. Not speaking about that. Of course, ishtadlus needs to be done, but ishtadlus in normal measures. Not that a person should, in the name of ishtadlus, go ahead and twist things around in such a way that that there's no aspect of bitachon to say, Rebbeinu Shalom, I'm doing what I'm called upon to do in a normal circumstance within the framework of society, etc. And I believe that you're going to give me my parnasa based in that. So if such a person is eina b'teach u'ma'amin b'Hashem, shebevada yasmin le parnasasa v'chayin nafshay. Who's the one who gives life? Is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says the Zohar Kadosh. The one who gives life, Yoav Mizayne. He'll give you Mizaynes also. You don't find people starving in the streets. Generally speaking, in our societies at least, Baruch Hashem, that's a privilege, by the way, because there are places in the world where it's not so pashut, and we have to be thankful for that, You have to be thankful for that. But we don't find that even by the most, the poor, the poverty, Baruch Hashem, you don't find such a thing. People make it, right? There needs to be an aspect of trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give it up to him, to do our hishtadlus in a normal, within a normal framework, but then to give it up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Amar Abal Shem Tov, and Abal Shem HaKadosh says something amazing based on this concept, that ultimately it's a trap, that ultimately it's secondary, it's b'di'evet, it's not the way that life was supposed to be lived. Life is not your job, right? Life is not my work. Life is much broader. Life is much more core, is much more essential than that. So the Baal Shem Tov says this amazing thing based on what Chazal say, Shemasha Amru Chazal u'mitzuda prusa kol ha'chaim, that a trap is spread over all the living. Prusa hu malashan al manas lekabel pras. Prusa could mean a trap, but it could also mean reward. It could also mean schar. So he says, you know what the mitzuda is that's spread over all of mankind? Mitzuda prusa al kol ha'chaim. It's the mitzuda of pras. It's the mitzuda of trying to make a paycheck. That's the mitzuda that's spread over all of life. Mitzuda prusa al kol ha'chaim. Amanas lekabel pras. Uperish pras meloshem parnasa. V'zeh mitzuda shel parnasa hu kol chai shemavakesh parnasasa v'nitrav ma'oid ve'ein libay panu l'avodas Hashem ad kan dvar. So again, this is very important because it's very delicate. Of course, now that there's been a curse, and now that there's ksuba when a person gets married, and now that there's an akuda and an inyan of HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanting that a person should do maso matan be'emunah and should have confidence in the manner in which he or she is able to support a family and contribute and so on and so forth, a person has to do ishtadlus. That's not the question. The question is getting so wrapped up in this anxiety and this concept of like what I need to do and how much I need to have and prepare for how many generations and so on and so forth, that it doesn't leave any time for avodas Hashem, which ultimately is the whole purpose of the parnas in the first place, which is obviously, a ridiculous thing that a person should spend his whole life devoted to something that's decidedly secondary and leave the, that which is primary. That's the Baal Shem Tov. Mitzuda prusa al kol ha'chaim. When a person's going to look all the time with truth, and he's living in such a way of emunah, and he trusts in Hashem, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will help him, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will fill the vessels of his hishtadlos, that's normal, average level hishtadlos, and a person believes that the whole work is only to make a little kli and to fulfill this, and to do what he's supposed to do in a faithful way, but then he goes with emunah and he goes with bitachon. K'maimer HaKosov, like the pasuk tells us, "Poseach es yodecha umasbia l'chol chayrotzai," right? That we believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to open His hand and support all living beings and satisfy all of humankind. V'yamen v'yiftach b'chesed Hashem, and he trusts in the essential kindness of Hashem. Sheyazman le'parnasasai v'chol tzracha bilti yischak m'shaloi v'arminius, outside of all of His own egoistic strategies. As I'm a mela. Memela, he's going to clear his heart from all of his own personal shtick and all of his own personal trying to school the system. And he can walk in a way of, it also goes to what we spoke about last night, to go in a Tuesday night, to go in a way of total pshitas, to go in a way of simplicity, to do what we're called upon to do, but then to give up the rest to Hashem. And then to devote the remaining time that would have otherwise been swallowed up by his workaholic aspect of just, so fearful of how much we need to make and how much we need to prepare. There were tzaddikim who mamash lived day to day. They literally, Rabbi Nachman has a story, right, about the simple person and about how he's so joyous all the time, and the king is so jealous of it because he's so joyous and the king is so miserable. How does this person work? What was his derech hachaim? Okay, this is not necessarily recommended for us now, but to think that such a thing existed, he literally went out and he worked as much as he would need for his dinner, for his one meal a day. And he came home and he had the money, he chopped down a couple of trees, he bought dinner, and he was besimcha with that. And then the next morning he went back to work and he lived like that, mamish day to day. There are certainly people who live that way month to month, right? And certainly year to year and so on and so forth. So there's a certain tmimus in that. But to not allow the thing that's secondary to become the main thing. To know that we need to do hashtadlas, we need to devote ourselves to parnasa and try in as much as we can within our own power, b'siyata d'shmaya, as we're going to see, that even the shtadlus we do is all Kadosh Baruch Hu. But to go ahead and to try, but not to allow that to negate any possibility for him to devote a large amount of time to the essence of living, to why you're trying to make money so you can eat, so you can have health and have life. For what? For what? What is that all a vessel for? What's the essence of it? So he says, Torah, that such a person should be able to devote himself to learning, and that the Torah should shine upon him. Torah, R Yaakov, that the Torah that we're about to receive again, mamish on Shavuos, as we come up to Shavuos next week, that the light of the Torah should shine upon him, that will enable him to walk from level to level, until such a person can get to an exalted level where he's considered on the level mamish of a mishkan. That we can become the Shekhinah, that godliness can dwell within us. And through the different aspects of the way that we interact with the world, with our koach of dibur, and our koach of shmiya, and our koach of touch, and with all the different aspects of the way that we can interact with the world, we can shine God's light into the world mamish. That we can allow ourselves to become a vessel and a chariot for Hashem, and to beam out the light, mamish like the Beis Hamikdash, that the windows were narrow on the inside and very wide on the outside, so the light of the menorah could shine out and illuminate the entirety of the world. As the Bas Ayin says, we've already spoken about previously. He says, this is what Chazal say, the Torah was only given to whom? To those that ate the man. What does that mean? Well, that's clear. We see that, right? That those Jews that stood by Matan Torah were completely sustained by the man, and the Torah came down to that generation, and we know that from the Psukim. What do Chazal mean to say, Lo nitna Torah ela lo'echle man? And what about to me and you? But the Torah is not coming down to every single generation. Moshe kibul Torah misina, Mitzvah Yeshua, Yeshua Zakim, Zakim Levim, and so on and so forth. What does this mean? What do Chazal mean to tell us? Says the Bas Ayin, Perish, Oichle Man, you know what it means to eat the man? Not just that literal generation that stood in the Bamidbar, that received the Torah in Har Sinai. Because you and I could also eat the man. What does this mean to eat man? Haylahem b'chinas Emunah and Bitachon. You know what the Oichle Man had? You know how these people lived mamish with full consciousness that their very nutrition and what was keeping their bodies going was a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Like the pasuk says, it isn't the bread that a person lives on. Right? It's the utterance of God. It's the chiyus. It's the life force. It's the letters inside the bread of kedusha. It's the sparks of holiness within the bread, and so on and so forth. But to realize that ultimately, essentially, everything is Hashem. We have to play our part. We're little puppets in this world, and the puppets work the opposite way. Not that the strings are being pulled and we just stay limp and allow ourselves to be moved, but the more that we're moving down here, the strings are affecting Shemayim and enabling tremendous hashpah to come down in exact accordance with how much we're going to be conscious of how this system works. That it's Hishtadlus, but ultimately Hishtadlus is only a vessel for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to come in and do the rest, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't really need our Hishtadlus. He can sustain us. That's called Eichlei Man, and that's who the Torah is given to. If a person doesn't have an aspect where he's connected to Emunah in such a way where Hashem is real to him, and not only is it real in an intellectual or theological or philosophical standpoint or perspective, but bitachon, mamish, able to bring it into life, such a person is going to be able to be Mekabel the Torah. Such a person is going to be able to bring the Torah into his or her life and apportion enough time to delve into the Torah, or to delve into the mitzvahs, or to delve into chesed, or any of those aspects of Torah, avodah, gemilas, chasadim that the world stands on. It doesn't say that the world stands on parnasa, and what's the world? No, parnasa is supported, meaning the concept of why a person needs to make money in order to buy food, in order to live, and so on and so forth. Al shloisha devarim ha'olam oimed. Torah, avodah, gemilas, chasadim. The more that a person is able to tap into this aspect of Emunah and Bitachon, not to be so busy all the time with anxiety and stressing out of the future and what's going to be, but simply to do what we need to do and then to give the rest to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, such a person can tap into the Torah because he simply on a time level has much more time in his day because he doesn't spend all the time fretting, right, and worrying. So then the larger portion of time is going to be able to be apportioned to Limud HaTorah and to our engagement with Torah and mitzvahs. And so that's the Nakudi here, Lo Nitin Torah Elo Eichlei Man. Who was the Torah given to? Not just to the generation of those who ate the man physically in the Midbar, but to all generations of those who are on the aspect of Eichlei Man in the sense that they're cognizant that any of their parnasa that they're making is ultimately coming mamish from Hashem. And he says this is Pshat on the pasuk Zacharti lo chesed urayich, about that generation of the man that left Mitzrayim with just the bread on their back, mamish, that turned the dough on their back that turned into matzah. Zacharti lo chesed urayich. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I remember the love of our youth. Lech tech acharai bamidbar, how you ran into the desert. It's the bechina bitachon. The Eretz Leizarua, in a place that you can't plant anything in. You didn't know what you were going to eat tomorrow, but you came after me. The whole Yiddishkeit is founded on this, that Am Yisrael had enough hope, had enough strength, had enough belief based on their faith and bitachon in Hashem that we left Mitzrayim and went out into the Midbar. Then we were able to journey to the Torah. Then we were able to journey to Har Sinai, because the prerequisite for Matan Torah is necessarily this aspect of Emunah and Bitachon. Chesed nu'urayach, amis klulisayach, lech teich acharei Bamidbar be'eretz loizarua, to travel after Hashem into this place of loizarua. Ki aminu ba'Hashem, because they had Emunah in Hashem, ubatchu bai, and they believed in Him, they trusted in Him. So he says it's not that they were eating the man and therefore they were zocha to Emunah and Bitachon because that was their life. Because I'm sure if you and I would find man by our doorstep, it would also be very easy. But it wasn't that. They earned the man by virtue of their demonstration that they were essentially man people, because they went out into the desert not knowing that they were going to have the man, but they demonstrated to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which was itself the actualization of what they later said. Na'aseh v'nishma is also the same nekuda. Na'aseh v'nishma. It was because of the aspect of Na'aseh, which was the aspect of Emunah and Bitachon. Zacharti l'chesed urayich avos klulisayich lech teich acharei bamidbar be'eretz loizarua. That's Na'aseh, that memela nishma. So then they got the man because they were already on the level of man, which means to say that you and I can also be eichlei man, irrespective of whether or not we actually have man in our mailbox, which would be beautiful. And I bless it upon us, maybe soon, who knows, right? But that's not our reality. But we can still be called Eichlei Man because the Eichlei Man were Eichlei Man long before they ate the man, right? They were Eichlei Man in the sense that they went after HaKadosh Baruch Hu into the desert. Chesed urayich, Emunah and Bitachon, and Simcha. Lo yishrudim beparnasa. Right, or rather, right? Ki aminu ba'Hashem ubatchu bai, v'lachein nitin lehem maman. And that's why the man was given to them. We know that the clothing that they wore all the 40 years, can you imagine how much clothing did they have already? How much were they able to make, from their cattle and sheep? But ultimately, whatever little they had, it didn't wear. And their hearts were open to Avodas Hashem. What were they doing in the Midbar the whole day? What were they doing? They were learning. They were davening. They were serving Hashem on the deepest levels. They were b'dibuk chaverim and chesed and a true community, a true a nation. We don't have that so much today, unfortunately. It's getting stronger as we come closer to Geula, especially now when things like are going on in Eretz Yisrael and everyone should be safe. And the shiur should be as a succos for all those that are mamish living lives in untenable circumstances, in bomb shelters for days on end, with no school for the kids, and terrible terror and fear, and those that are sick should have and those that are hurt should have a speedy refuah shalema. But a little bit of circumstance like this awakens that feeling of a national spirit, whether it's in Eretz Yisrael or Bechlal, throughout the world, that every single member of Am Yisrael becomes bound to the essential nature. When one of us is under attack, all of us are under attack. It has nothing to do with the secular state. It has to do with Yidden, because this has nothing to do with the state. It has to do with Jews. And the same chevra that are throwing, shooting rockets into Israel would do the same if it wasn't, in Eretz Yisrael, if it was a Jewish state somewhere else, because a Jewish Indian, which is why Jews throughout the world, whether or not you believe in the state, whether or not you believe, whatever your hashkafa is regarding the state of Israel makes no difference. Am Yisrael is in pain, right? And so you better feel that, and your heart should mamish be open to the tsar of fellow Yidden, irrespective of one's own hashkafic approach, to the general state of Israel. But there's a national sense that has nothing to do with the government of Israel. It has to do very much with Eretz Yisrael, with our Tzenu HaKadosha, with our national homeland that all of us, yes, this is our national homeland. This is where we're headed, by hook or by crook. It should happen sooner than later. But over there, they were living in such a place where there was Torah, there was Avodah, there was Gemilas Chasadim. They lived as a nation with the Gulim. They worked like a well-oiled machine. Every chelik had their job. And they were able to devote themselves to that because they were eating the man, and because their clothing didn't wear, and because it just passed through them. They didn't even, everything, they didn't become sick. It didn't hurt their stomachs. On the contrary, it was healing them all the time. What was that all founded on? They have to know what came first and what came second. It isn't as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu showered them with man and said, Chevra, come into the Midbar. More of the, there's more of that when you get there. It's not what happened. The first thing is we went into the Midbar. After that, because we demonstrated our Emunah and Bitachon in Hashem, we were zochet to the man. And so this is something that we can do as well. And the Torah is given to a generation or to an individual who is the Bachin of Eichle man. That's the prerequisite. That's mamash the prerequisite here. Okay, so and that's why the Torah was given to them. But there's another level. Afterwards, when a person goes ahead and attains the Torah, or Meir Bam Toisefes Kedusha, a person becomes elevated beyond words and beyond understanding, how a person becomes transformed through Liman Torah and through engagement with Hashem that comes through the means of the Torah, elevated to such a level, to such a madrega. Then there's no aspect anymore of bitachon to say, I'm going to take action and rely on Hashem to go ahead and to fill the vessels that I'm doing. Because that still implies that there's a me and there's a Hashem. But on the higher level of a person whose consciousness is elevated to the point that he really lives Shivisi Hashem L'negdi Samin, which was what the Baal Shem Tov wanted of us, or at least the aspect of Einoid Malvadai, right? These different psukim, these different approaches to life, that is a very high level of consciousness. It's easy, again, to say it, but to live with it, to really live with it. So when a person gets to such a level, there's no more bitachon in the sense that I'm doing hishtadlos. I am doing hishtadlos and relying on Hashem. Everything is Hashem's. In oid mavada, in strichen lebechina zu shall bitachon shehi ketanos. Ultimately, a lower level, right? It's a very high level for most of us, right? At least for me, it can speak for me. It's a very high level. I'm trying to get there, but for those that are on the level where they transcend, and once they have access to the Torah in such a deep way, they leave bitachon behind. This is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Moshe before HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke to him by the burning bush. Take off your na'alayim. Take off your shoes. What's the meaning of shoes? He says bitachon is called shoes. Because the pasuk says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, how sweet are your footsteps. This goes back, by the way, many Mefarshim learn, to this pasuk that we quoted before. Which footsteps? The footsteps that Am Yisrael took out of Mitzrayim into a Eretz Lo Zarua, into the Midbar. That's the beauty of Pamayich Bana Olim. Na'olim, the shoes that Am Yisrael walk after Hashem with, is the aspect of bitachon. What does Hashem say to Moshe Rabbeinu? Shalna alecha mi'al reglecha. Moshe Rabbeinu, you're getting to the level where mamash, you're going to speak panim to Hashem by the sneh. Shalna alecha. Leave the mayafu pamayich bana olim on the side. Take off the midah bitachon. It's like, a rocket ship that's shot into the air. It needs boosters first. Then it gets into the place where it's beyond the orbit. Everything falls away, right? Because you don't need the boosters anymore. And Moshe, you take off the training wheels. Moshe got to a level where the training wheels were taken off. Because ultimately, even bitachon is a lower level, klape, the higher levels of complete bittul to Hashem. But however, even though the aspect of bitachon is a lower level, it's impossible to get to any higher level, all of the higher levels of which come through limud HaTorah, if a person is not going to take this aspect of bitachon and start with that, to really believe and to take action based on that faith. Bitachon also means confidence, kochot bitachon, security, a sense of strength, a sense of confidence in our mission. It doesn't only mean to go ahead and to believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to help us and so on and so forth, but to act based on the confidence of knowing Hashem put me in the world to do something special, and it goes for each and every one of us. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects of us to hold tight to Him, stand up strong, not for us, for Him, and to go out into the world. It goes back to what the Bas Ayin said all the way in the beginning, right? What do we say? V'gam ani enechelti be'ezras Hashem. That's bitachon in and of itself. That takes bitachon. That takes a bitachon rooted in a HaKadosh Baruch Hu to know that Hashem wants something of me. And Hashem believes in me, to act on that. That gives the person time and yishavadas and simcha and the openness to really delve into the Torah in a very deep way. Memela, that's going to bring a person to a higher level where bitachon, those accompanying rockets, they fall away, and the spaceship is out in orbit, mamish, in orbit. Or it's not even its own energy, it's just drawn into the orbit of Kudsha Baruch Hu Shchinte. So he says that's the bechina of Emunah. That's the aspect of Emunah. That's Madriga Tachtoina. But you need that in order to get to the limud HaTorah, which will bring a person to the higher level. A person needs to always focus on the tremendous kindness of Hashem. That a person should understand the shtados we have to do because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do it, because and because there's that aspect of bechira in this world, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't want to reveal Himself as He will hopefully very soon. But Hashem wanted that we should play our part and earn and so on and so forth. That's the bechina of Ishtadlus. But to believe ultimately that our gain financially has zero to do with our Ishtadlus. There's a famous graphic that goes around the illustration of a person fishing, right? And he has his bucket behind him and he's sitting on a sort of bridge, and all the fish are jumping into the bucket behind him. So he's fishing in one area, that's his Ishtadlus, and behind him, the fish are just jumping into the bucket. That's mamish how it is. That's mamish. I can tell you so many times that I thought with a tachbula, maybe this way, maybe that, and came from completely different area, and I'm sure so many of us have experienced such a thing. It has nothing to do. We have to do our shtadlus. That's a chayk. That's the nekuda of b'zeas apechat v'chalechem. That's expected of us. Masu maten the emunah. But then to believe still that everything is Hashem. Kamam rakosav the aid yalim in haaretz v'hishke. There was a aid. There was a mist that rose from the ground v'hishke. V'anon einai b'vadei koich anoishi rak chesed Hashem. So an amazing thing is that man is working the field of Adam ayin lavdes hadama, but ultimately man is supposed to go ahead and to work. But there's an aid. Ultimately, there's this mist without which I'm sure, geologically, I guess, or how do you call plant studies? I don't know, but the plant life people would surely admit, right, that far beyond the avoda of a farmer that goes into cultivating. We're going to Shemitah year now, but in a regular year, that a farmer goes ahead and prepares everything and all the different avodas to prepare the ground. Far more than that is the natural processes that have nothing to do with man. That has to do with photosynthesis and the sun and condensation and the rain and the whole process and what he's referring to here, which is the dew, and so much of what the farmer puts in, and he puts in azarim bedima. But barina yiksaru, you know what rina is? Rina is associated with simcha. You know what simcha is? Pa'eshev kivisiya. Emunah, simcha, bitachon. Bitachon, emunah, simcha. All these three things are bound together. That means a person who's azarim bedima, but he knows that the zriya that he's doing is only one tiny chelek. Ultimately, the third partner in the zriya of a human being, right, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, without whom none of our efforts make a dent or make a difference. even with all of the time and all the energy that we put into it. Says the Degel, you did nothing to create the dew that helps cultivate your plants, or the rain that's going to fall, or the sun that's going to shine. You do your inyan, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing his, and he's carrying your inyan, and he's making it possible. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one that's really ultimately doing the bulk of the work. So how foolish is it that we think that it's our own koach va'otzim yadi? What's your koach coming from? Your whole koach is coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who's giving you life every second. So Nimsa, we didn't do anything. Even our shtadlus we didn't do. The Pesach Rebbe explains, without getting to the whole thing now, but the Ish Kodesh explains that the whole essence of Chasidus came to reveal to the world that it's not simply there's a physical world that's filled with spirituality, but even the Kalim are ruchni. That was the Baal Shem Tov's Gilui. That was the final revelation. The understanding that it's not simply that there's Hishtadlus that's real, and then Hishtadlus becomes a vessel for the Shefa of Hashem. But even the Hishtadlus, Ein Oid Malvado, even the Kalim of the physical hands that do the labor are themselves Ruchni. That's the Gilui of Chasidus, right? That's the final revelation. Umala ha'aretz das that the whole world, Be'ezer Hashem, very soon will be absolutely filled with the complete revelation of God, with no partitions and no barriers in between. Complete tocho ratzuf, miksha achazav, like it says by the Menorah. So he says over here that this anan didn't come from human beings; it came from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what's watering all the ground, which is reference to Parnasa that we do, but the bulk of it is coming from Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu that utilized the Torah to get to such a lofty level, he already utilized Bitachon to access Torah, to then go ahead into this place of orbit. Mamish Einod Mavadai, Hashem is carrying us. We don't have Ishtadlos. There's nothing but Him. Amar Lois, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, Shal Na'alecha. Remove your na'olim, remove your shoes. What shoes? Ma'yafu pa'mayich bana'olim. The reference to Am Yisrael's bitachon and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Hashem says, right now, you're beyond the level of bitachon, because you're not anymore in the mind space, like we mentioned before, of hishtadlos, and then the hishtadlos becomes a kli, and then shefa comes down. You're beyond that. Einod milvad. You're living on the level of Einod milvad mamish. It's like, and that's why shoes are the lowest part of the body, right? The lowest on the very end, on the bottom, what we step on is the lowest madrega of the Adam, because that's bitachon, which is ultimately a madrega katana, klape, the bigger, in relation to the bigger madrega. And this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe before Kabbalas HaTorah. Behold, I am approaching to you, appearing to you, ba'av he'anon, in the darkness in the thickness of the cloud. Ba'avur yishma'am b'dabri imo, so that the nation should hear when I speak to you. Perish, what does this mean? Says Hashem, I'm going to come down into your life. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants Am Yisrael to know that anytime there's an anon, anytime there's a cloud which is Eidi Alam and Haaretz, that is ultimately the process of rain, the natural process that even after all the avoda of the farmer, ultimately it's the natural processes that are taken into fruition, that's the cloud, is ultimately Av Ha'anon. Av is gematria, says the Bas Ayin. Av is gematria chesed. Umazir ischa b'chinas av ha'anon merames al b'chinas chesed gematria ayin beis. Ayin beis is also the shem ayin beis, also gematria chesed. Va'anon merames gamkin al b'chinas chesed k'niskala el. It's the teva that we think either that we did, right? We could fall under an illusion, or even to say that, oh, it's a natural process that's helping. But no, it's all HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So a person has to understand that this is the Nakuda of Av Ha'anan, that all the Anan, all the clouds in our lives, all the processes that make it possible for us to do Hishtadlos, and certainly the Shefa that fills the Kalim of our Hishtadlos, it's Av, it's all Ayin Beis, it's all Chesed, Av Ha'anan. Everything is chesed, everything is chesed. Not based on our own hishtadlus. This brings us to the bechina of Emunah and Bitachon. Everything that's happening in the world, by the way, this doesn't mean that everything's going to be peaches. It doesn't mean that everything's going to be nice. It doesn't mean that things are going to go well from our perception of how life should look, that we don't want to be running to bomb shelters every minute, that we don't want Israel to be heading into an imminent war, Rahman al-Islam, that we don't know what's going to happen with the world crumbling around us, both in America, around the world. There's never been, Kamat, a more volatile circumstance as we are in right now. Just, it's a tinderbox. One thing, we don't know what's going to be. But and Rahman al-Islam, Al Tiftach Be'Lasatan, we don't know how things are going to look. That's why the Lubavitch Rebbe would always bless all of his Hasidim, that they should be zeicha to the Tov HaNireh HaNiglis, that they should be zeicha to Tov, to goodness that's revealed. But that doesn't mean to say that everything else that happens, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is running this ship. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is running the show. He's been running it for close to 6,000 years, or for close to 7,000 years, 6 and some thousand years already. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking this where it needs to go. He has a plan. Netzach Yisrael Yishaker. We will be around to see this thing through to the finish line. Does that mean that every individual will? We should all be good, safe, happy, healthy. Every member of Am Yisrael should live till 120 in good health and happiness. Am Yisrael will survive. Am Yisrael Chai. Doesn't say every individual of Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael Chai. We will make it. This is our story. This is our sipur. When things like this happen and we find ourselves again in the crosshairs of the nations of the world, mamish, b'chol dar v'dar, ayim aleinu l'chaleseinu, there should be a certain sense, in addition to the pachad, in addition to the davening and the extra tilim and so on and so forth, there's a certain natural feeling in the sense that this is our story. This is our legacy. This is what our grandparents, great-grandparents, in Kemat, every single generation, certainly in Galus, went through. And this is our story. It's almost awkward if we weren't in these situations. This is our sipur. And to stand up with bitachon, with pride, to know that Av Echad Kulana, we have a father, an Av Rachaman, who's running this show, who's carrying us. That's a very powerful thing. That's a very, very powerful thing. That's Av Ha'anan. Anan could also mean a darkness, a cloud, like Rabbi Nachman describes in Torah Kuf Tesvav. It could mean a darkness. Even the Anan that looks like a darkness is Av Ha'anan. It's Av is Ayin Beis is Chesed. Ki Gavar Aleinu, all the Gvur that looks like it's happening in the world all around us, Chazda. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Chesed. Eloshem Moshe Rabbeinu Olav Shalom, but he says Moshe Rabbeinu Kvar Heiser Me'atzma B'chinazu Shenikra Min Aleph. That Moshe Rabbeinu, we already said, Shalna Alecha Mi Al Reglach. He didn't have that B'china of a Bitachon anymore because he transcended it. Kenes Gila'el. Kisha Amalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shalna Alecha Al Kain Teretz HaKosav Amar Only Bavur Yishma Ha'am B'Dabri Yimach. That's why there's a reference here to the nation. Because Moshe Rabbeinu Mitzad Atzmo didn't need this aspect of Bitachon anymore, Av Ha'anan. He was beyond that. He didn't even see an Anan. He saw only HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Hashem clarified, why do you need to go ahead and to bring about this Bechina of Av Ha'anan? That's for the Am. That's for the nation of that's for the nation of Am Yisrael. Not for you, Moshe, because Moshe already had transcended that Bechina. Al Kain Teretz HaKosav, Va'amar Babur Yishma Am B'Dabri Imach V'Gomer Tzalomer. Shemashani Masir Eischa Urak Babur Yishma Am. That's for the nation of Am Yisrael. That you should teach the nation of Am Yisrael how to go ahead and to tap into the Bechina of Av Ha'anan, to the Chesed in all the natural circumstances that we believe are being mashlim our own ishtadlus, to understand that it's all Hashem. So they should be zeicha to get to the level of Torah Bechina Asu Yisrael. And this is exactly what Am Yisrael did. And here we come, mamish, a couple of days leading up to Shavuos, doing our achanas, and this is very much part and parcel of it. And I thank each and every one of you for being a part of this, not only this shiur, but bechlalius, for being part of my little community, our little family, LPI. Mamash, we're coming up, like I mentioned already, not coming up, tomorrow is a full year already. So I thank you so much. So many of you have been mamish with us from the very beginning. And it's been such a journey. It's been such a chizuk that there are people literally all over the world, from every background, every age, every circumstance, every place physically, joining together to one hashkafa, joining together to understand that there's something we need to reclaim. That's something so powerful, and it means so much to me that I'm not alone on this often lonely path, the Gesher Tsar Ma'od, that I know that it's not so narrow if all of you are with me, right? And if all of us are together with each other, by virtue of us being together, we widen it, because the bridge widens in accordance with how many people walk it. So the more of us together, the more and more the bridge is widening, and it's more of a derech kvushal arabim, and it's happening in the world. It's remarkable to be a part of. So thank you so much for that. But this is the achana that we're doing. What is the achana for Shavuos? This. Emunah and Bitachon. This situation that we're in right now, whether we're in Eretz Yisrael, whether we're up north, whether we're down south, whether in Yerushalayim in the center, the center of the world, whether we're anywhere else in the world and feeling fragile, feeling the fragility of the situation, and the way in which it's so volatile and anything could shift and change, and it's a pachad pchadim. This is our hachana for Shavuos, for Kabbalas HaTorah. Not just for this year, but in our lives, anytime we're going to open a sefer, it begins with Aleph Beis, Emunah and Bitachon. That's the Aleph Beis of Yiddishkeit. Aleph Beis. That's the Aleph Beis, mamish. And it's possible to suggest that also Shas, every Masechta starts on Daf Beis. Daf Aleph is Emunah. Daf Aleph is Emunah. That's the prerequisite. The prerequisite for Kabbalas HaTorah is Emunah, is Av Ha'ana. And Hashem is challenging us now. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to give us the Torah now. We should be zecher to the Torah, the Atika Stima. We should be zecher to the utmost, deepest revelation of Torah that's going to make the rest of the Torah look like the dregs, to reveal the essence of Torah, the spiritual source of the Torah, with the coming of Mashiach, the Shavuos, Be'ezer Hashem. But leading up to it, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm going to give you a challenge in Isayon. Will you hold on to me when things aren't so, everything's nice and it's so easy? But what about Emunah Chabaleilos? What about Emunah Chabaleilos? That is the stage that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has set for us, that we should be zeicha to really hold on tight in this time to Emunah and Bitachon, so that we can come into Shavuos with our preparation to say, Rabban Shalom, I'm ready to receive the Torah and to really live it, to devote my life to it, that it should be the essence, the center point, the Yerushalayim of my life. So this was the essence. So the China Asi Yisrael v'schazku b'midas Emunah v'bitachon. But the first thing is Pesach. Like we said, the first thing is going out into the Midbar, Lechtech Achram, Bamidbar be'eretz lo yizarua, with the dough on our backs. That's the Bechina Matzah. That's Pesach. They already tasted the man in the matzah, because the matzah and man were one and the same. It was the vessel for their bitachon. Hashem until they entered into such a life of saying that the essence is the princess, is malchus, is emunah, is Yerushalayim, is tefillah, is spoddos, is simcha, and so on and so forth. To hold on to that and realize that that's the core of my life, that's why I'm here, to the point that they were able to then go ahead and receive the Torah on Har Sinai. The Kiblos HaTorah are al Har Sinai. To receive the Torah are the light of the Torah in Har Sinai until they got to such a level where they were absolutely cleansed, and they became mamish themselves into the aspect of Mishkan Oil Moed. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu rested on us. This was the trajectory. It began with a show of Emunah Bitachon, the Bechina of Naseh. Then we got to Har Sinai. We were Makabel the Torah into the vessel of our having prepared for it. And then we got the Mishkan. And we became the Mishkan because we transcended the level of Bitachon and we got to the place of Ein Oid Milvada. Shalna Alecha Mi'al Reglecha. The Ikra Achana Tzricha Liyas Tchila B'chinas Emunah Bitachon. But again, the main thing is the Emunah and the Bitachon. Uboy Ganas B'chinas Kedusha. And that's where Kedusha is hidden. Listen to this remez. It's phenomenal. Umerumas B'milas Batach. This is hinted to in the word batach, which means bitachon in and of itself. Why? Because if you open up the word bitachon, we know that every letter is also a word. So the letter beis is a letter, but it also is a word. Bayis, beis, yud taf. You can spell out the letter beis as it's pronounced. Ches, or rather tes and ches. All of these letters you can open up. Umilui shall call ois hu yud taf. Each and every letter in the word batach has a miloi of yud taf. The beis is spelled beis yud taf, the tes is spelled tes yud taf, and the ches is spelled ches yud taf. The gematria of yud taf, which is the milui of these three, is gematria kadosh. It's gematria holy. The milui of the word batach, bitachon, is gematria kadosh. Because the way in which we're going to be able to transcend, kedusha means to transcend, that which is above, that which is removed, that which is beyond, that which is mukdash. In order to get there, it starts with bitachon. And then once we have the beis, tes, ches, batach, we can go beyond that into the yud taf, gematria kodesh. He says there's not one other letter of the Aleph beis that has the milu yud taf. It's only these three. Gematria kodesh. The alzenikr bitachon bechinas kisui. Bitachon in this sense is considered a kisui, a covering. Because again, it's the first level. So even bitachon, which is a very high madriga, right? Halavai beinini, like they say in Chabad. Halavai, we should get the level of bitachon. But ultimately, klape, the higher madriga of Moshe Rabbeinu, it's still a covering because it covers over. That's why Beis Tes Ches, Betach is hiding the Yud Tav, which is the Kedusha beyond the Midah of Bitachon. You have to first come to the covering, then you can open the covering and go beyond. But the first thing is Daf Aleph, is Emunah. And the Aleph Beis of Yiddishkeit, Emunah Bitachon, Bechinas Bitachon. Okay, with this we'll come to an end with the last 5 minutes. And again, thank you so much for joining each and every one of you. I cannot express to you how much it means to me. It's mamish, a privilege and a gift, the sweetest moments in my life to be able to learn Torah with you. So here we come to the end. Toward the end of Parashas Bamidbar, it's charged the obligation of overseeing the oil moed on the Bnei Kahas. When they took down the Mishkan, they had to cover all of the different things. They had to arrange all the beams that they had deconstructed and cover it over, so that nobody should come and see the Mishkan as it looks when it's deconstructed. They had to cover the whole thing over. Perish. He says, what does this mean, Jesus? Alpi Remes, says the Bas Ayin, this is a reference to every single human being, every single Jew throughout time who's going to be involved in this avodah of oil moed kodesh kadashim. Perish. To make themselves into an oil moed. People that are involved in this holy work. Those people that are always going from level to level, from the level of Bamidbar, which is Mitzrayim, which is Pesach, to the level of Shavuos, which is the Bechin of Kabbalas HaTorah, and beyond, which is ultimately the level of the Succos, right? Because Succos is the Nakuda Mamish, Diras Ara. You go out into the street, you mafkir yourself. You say, there's no such thing as a Diras Keva in this world. The whole world is not a Diras Keva. Everything is you, only you, only you, only you. That's the trajectory. It starts with Pesach. Pesach is a preparation for Shavuos, and then Shavuos, Mamish, gives us the ability to go to Succos. Succos is the pinnacle. Succos is Das. Pesach is Chachma. Shavuos is Bina. And Succos is Das. For those that are involved in this, going from level to level, the first thing is we got to talk to you about coverings. So we have to talk to you about the Midah Bitachon. That's the first level. Because Madregas, back a line. But once we tell you about the kisoy that they have to cover it over, we could say v'samu badav. You can arrange the badav, which is the beams of the Mishkan. Why badav? What's that a reference to? The word badav is a reference to different levels that you're going to proceed on once you deal with bitachon, which is the kisoy. The Beis Tes Ches, which is the outside of the Yud Tav, which is Kedusha, the ultimate goal, which is Sukkos. But the Indian of Badav is Madregas. How do we know? Shamadregas Nikra im Badim, B'Shem Badim, Kamamerakasa, Bad Bebadi, about the Ketores. We talk about how it needs to be equal measures, right? And so bad can be a reference to a Madrega. It should be leveled out. So v'samu badav means once you deal with the Indian of kisoy, which is the Indian of bitachon, then v'samu badav, then you can start to engage with madregas and go from level to level like Moshe Rabbeinu all of a shalom. That's the bechina of Pesach, Shavuos, and Succos. And the Torah is going to bring tremendous illumination into our lives. We become totally pure, totally refined. Then you come into the level of oil moed. However, and this is the key, but a person should know very, very strongly, you can't simply jump into the level of Kedusha. I don't need to do Ishtadlos. Everything is Hashem. You can't, right? If it's not emes, if it's not rooted in the truth of where a person is holding, it has to start first. You can't jump to a very high level without the hachana first. And that's what the pasuk finishes up. The last pasuk in Parashas Bamidbar. Don't think that you're going to see the Mishkan without the kisoy, without the prerequisite of bitachon, because that's going to lead to misa, maybe even physically. Rahman al-Islam, if the improper shtadlos is not done, could lead to bechina misa. So it has to start with the kisoy, then bad, which is the bechina madregas, the aspect of going from level to level within the bitachon of limanat Torah and so on and so forth, and then a person can get to kedusha, which is beyond Beis Tes Ches. But before that, it could bring to a matzav of misa, Rahman al-Islam. psychologically, emotionally, and so on and so forth. It has to go in the proper darga to darga, always in a measured way. Like Rabbi Nachman says so often, alti and nivhal. A person shouldn't be bewildered and notice Hashem. You go in a measured fashion, calmly, and in a very collected way. So here we come to the end. With this, we can understand the pasuk with which we began. Vayadaber Hashem al Moshe b'Midbar Sinai. Perish Yisrael b'Bechinas Midbar Sinai b'Bechinas Emunah and Bitachon. K'mayim Rakasav Lechtech Achra Bamidbar. These words Midbar Sinai is a reference to the Midah Bitachon, because Hashem said Lechtech Achra Bamidbar. The whole aspect of their being in the desert in the first place was an expression of their Emunah and Bitachon. Va'al Yodei Zeh Ba'u L'Bechinas Oyel Moi. Says the Kadosh Baruch Hu, Vayadaber Hashem al Moshe b'Midbar Sinai ba'Oyel Moed. If you can get into the aspect of Midbar, the Bechina Bitachon and Emunah, that could lead to Oyel Moed, to that place of Kedusha. Perish and Nas Yisrael ba'atzman Bechinas Oyel Moed. They themselves, each and every one of us, will become a vessel for the Shechina Kedusha. Umafarish HaPasuk Oid Yosef Amar be'echad l'chodesh hasheni. Perish me'ayin hayolahem koyach zeh lav l'bechinas Oyel Moed. Where will they have this strength from? V'amar Kasav, you know from where? Be'echad l'chodesh hasheni, the first of the second month. Perish, this is a reference, min haman, to the man, shenit l'hem chodesh hasheni, which we know came down to Am Yisrael in the second month. And so it's mirishan from the very first, from the essence, from the Rosh Chodesh of the second month in which the man fell. That's going to give them the aspect and the strength to reach the level of Oyel Moed, the Bechina of Midbar Sinai, the Bechina of Bitachon, that enabled Am Yisrael to be able to receive the man. But it started with their own Emunah Bitachon first. The Aleph base of Yiddishkeit, Daf Aleph, started with Emunah. And I guess that's the aspect of the echad lachodesh, because it was echad. They were able to go ahead and to believe in Hashem echad u'shmai echad through their aspect of the second month, which was the man that came down to them because of the Bechina of Midbar Sinai, because lechtech achar b'Midbar mayafu pamayach bana olim, because they had Emunah and Bitachon. The oneness of Hashem, and that's the echad lachodesh. From what ultimately b'shana hashenis, let's say some eretz Mitzrayim. Umrumas ba'amri, let's say some eretz Mitzrayim. Lefisha kol b'china zu ba'lahem ba'achana me'eretz Mitzrayim. What's the beginning of this process that ultimately leads us to Succos? It starts with Yitzias Mitzrayim. Yitzias Mitzrayim, Chachma is first, Emunah Bitachon. Kabbalas HaTorah comes through that prerequisite, which is Shavuos, and then we're able to bring this baby home all the way down to Succos, where we're able to mamish put it into practice. That's what Das is. Das brings what we know intellectually into actuality, the way that we're able to really live our lives. So, but it all goes back to what? It all goes back to Shana Shenis, let's say, some Eretz Mitzrayim. Eretz Mitzrayim, sheyatz be'emunah k'niskal el v'holchu bad b'bad, and it went slowly but surely mimadrega l'madrega ad she'egiu lahar Sinai v'kibla Torah v'nasa az b'chinas Oyel Moed, and then they were able to go into Succos, which is the pinnacle of Yiddishkeit. Shehishra Kadosh Baruch Hu shchinasa b'seichel echad be'echad Yisrael yiratzen sheniskal azeh amen kain yiratzen. And so I bless us, Be'ezer Hashem, that we should mamish only hear good news. Like I mentioned again and again, we're living in a very, very, very difficult time. And we need a tremendous amount of tefillah. We need a tremendous amount of noisa ba'ol, tremendous amount of feeling the pain of our brethren, and to do anything that we can as a succos and to have it on our minds. We can't just live life like normal. We're not living in a normal time. But we should only hear good news, and we should be able to be omed in the nisayon, ultimately of Emunah Bitachon, in such a way that can bring us to a Shavuos, not in the midst of a war, but in the midst of a resolved situation, not just to go back to a normal status quo, but even a higher place where we can mamish enjoy Shavuos without any daiga, without any worry, without any pain, in a matzah of Tchias HaMesim, in a matzah of Mashiach, in a matzah of the Gilui Torah Da'atika Stima, and walk into it with the prerequisite of having weathered this storm with our strength being very, very firmly rooted in Bitachon, in Emunah, in the Bechina of trusting that HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows what He's doing, and He's carrying us, and we should all be able to really let go and let God in that way. Okay, so thank you so much for joining. I really do appreciate it. Yeah, if you have a question, we have some time.
Yes, comment. Thing Lost Princess related is that the idea about all or nothing, like we shouldn't get stuck with the journey, but like holding on to bitachon, like not like the falling asleep or having asvas.
Absolutely.
Not to hold on to the journey, to not.
And that's what it's all about. That's mamash what it's all about. Yeah. because in the context of the story, it's very much the viceroy's own choices. But over here, what we're living with is something that's completely out of our, but could still throw us completely out of whack, and so we have to mamish hold strong. We have to hold strong, hold strong to that Indian. If we're working for Hashem and we're in it for Him, and that's it. So we should be zeicha to really use our lives the way that our lives are supposed to be used. And it makes no difference what circumstances are surrounding us. Let that not knock us off, or what the essence of why we're here, whether it's parnasa or anything else. Let us not lose the princess, or let us at least attempt to reclaim her. What's the essence of Yiddishkeit? What is this thing all about? Bless us with a lot of success, Be'ezer Hashem. Continued Hatzlacha. Thank you so much for being a part of LPI. Thank you so much. As we come, Be'ezer Hashem, stand on the threshold of a second year. We have a tremendous amount planned, Be'ezer Hashem, for the coming year. A lot of exciting things. And I couldn't do it without all of you. So thank you so much for giving me chizuk and for being a part of it. We should only hear good news, Be'ezer Hashem. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Wishing everyone a beautiful, lichtige Shavuos, mamish a Shavuos full of simcha and only good news, Be'ezer Hashem. Okay,
Amen.
Shabbos. Thank you, Chevra. Shabbos.